You're listening to episode 154 of The Secular Buddhist. Welcome to The Secular Buddhist. I'm Ted Meissner. The Secular Buddhist is the official podcast of the Secular Buddhist Association, a grassroots-driven effort to answer the needs of secular teaching and practice for contemporary society. The podcast has interviews and roundtable discussions pertaining to engaged Buddhist training and practice, and the SBA website has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Though the podcast focuses on core practice from a secular viewpoint, more traditional teachings are welcome and openly discussed. Jenny Phillips speaks with us today about her film, The Dhamma Brothers, about teaching Vipassana to inmates in a maximum security prison in Alabama. There are all kinds of reasons we find not to meditate. It can be hard work, for one thing, and sometimes we wriggle away mentally from the effort. And yet that effort is worth the time and commitment to actually do the practice. And those gains can be tremendous if we've never before considered taking on meditation and doing it exclusively for a 10-day retreat. Consider that situation in one of the most restrictive settings known, prison. Oddly, as we'll see, the structured nature of prison life can make it well suited to the austere and regimented processes of a Vipassana retreat. Jenny Phillips is a cultural anthropologist, writer, and psychiatric nurse. For over 15 years, she has provided services in the mental health department of a large medical center in Concord, Massachusetts. Her specialties include crisis intervention, family therapy, behavioral medicine, and hypnotherapy. Over the past 10 years, she has worked with men in both state and county prisons, teaching courses on emotional literacy skills. In 2008, Phillips released The Dhamma Brothers into movie theaters. While working on the film, she received more than 200 letters from the Alabama prisoners documenting their lives in prison and their quest for inner peace. These collected letters were published in 2008 by Pariyatti Press as Letters from the Dhamma Brothers. So, sit back, relax, and have a nice, organic East India blend tea. Our guest today is Jenny Phillips. Jenny, thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
Very glad to have you. We're going to be talking about your film, The Dhamma Brothers, and the associated book with that, Letters from the Dhamma Brothers, Meditation Behind Bars. But I'd like to start by asking you about your background, both in film and your personal practice, and how those might have come together.
Well, you'll probably be surprised to hear that I came into this really because I wanted to tell a certain story, and the story was the amazing thing that was happening in this maximum security prison in Alabama. And I do tend to write about things, but I believe that the only way that I could tell the power of the story of what was unfolding right in front of my eyes was to make a movie. And I then began searching for ways to make a film, having no background in film, and it was a very long journey. And I underwent a great search to find the right people, which I eventually did. And then when the film was all finished and was released, then the work really began, because I feel as if since the film came out in movie theaters in 2008, it's been, although I have another job, several other jobs, it's been almost a full-time job to follow this film as it spread its wings and took off around the world in many languages and in many settings, and I never, ever would have expected it. And the only way I can explain why it's been so successful or so widely distributed is because it's a very small, simple story of a few good people trying to make their lives better under really impossibly difficult and dangerous and dark circumstances.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like you started with the book first, and when you initially started that, was there any intention with the film?
I didn't start with the book first. Really, the book really is a collection of letters that I received. I don't want to give away too much about the film, but somewhere in the middle of our filming, the program gets shut down. And at that point, I'd already received many letters from the Dhamma brothers, but at that point, the letters were pouring in as they began to search for ways to maintain their practices. And the letters are wonderful. They are just an expression of life behind bars and the struggles and tragedies and triumphs of living behind bars. I think the story of the Dhamma brothers really begins with the fact that I'm a psychotherapist and I have been working with men in prison in my home state of Massachusetts for, I guess, 15 years now. And back in 1999, I've been teaching a program called Houses of Healing, which is out of a foundation called the Lionheart Foundation. And basically it's a 10, 12, 14-week psychotherapy group in which meditation is an important component. And so from the first moment I meet these men, and usually about 12, 15 men, they make a commitment to meditate every day. And we begin very, very small and slowly, because in prison you don't close your eyes. They're in a room full of strangers. They don't know one another even usually. And they begin by sitting and following their breath. And we start very, very small. Well, then I had heard in 1999 that this prison that's the subject of the film, that this same program was being offered in this maximum security prison outside Birmingham, Alabama, and that the prisoners themselves, they had the teacher's manual and the books themselves, because each prisoner gets a copy of this book called Houses of Healing, and that they were all reading it in groups and that they were teaching themselves the program. And for some reason, I just thought, well, let me go down and see what they're doing, and let me see how it compares with what I'm doing up here. And it just seemed like a interesting thing to do. And I got in touch with the prison psychologist, and I went down to visit some of these meditating prisoners. And I immediately connected with the place, with the people, with the staff, and with the psychologist, Dr. Kavanaugh. And that began my own journey to try to bring Vipassana to the prisoners at Donaldson. Because I think one of the things I've found over my years working with prisoners, I teach brief mindfulness meditation, and the prisoners make a commitment to meditate for 15, 20 minutes a day and keep a journal. And that's really powerful, and it's a great tool for them. And they begin to learn to understand their emotions experientially from the inside. They begin to anticipate and work with and regulate their emotions. And it's a very helpful thing, but it doesn't allow them to go deeply within themselves, because, they meditate for a few minutes and then they step out into the pandemonium of general population. And it's not deep enough. And what I found among the prisoners at Donaldson Prison was that they wanted something really deep so that they could access their deepest issues and their traumas and their crimes and their stories, which is not uncommon. I mean, Donaldson is just another prison out there on the landscape. It's nothing unusual, except it might be a little bit more, it's the end of the line in the Alabama correctional system. It's a level 6 security prison, which means it's the lowest that you can go, or the highest you can go in the system. And there's very little resources. They get less money paid to feed them each day than any other state in the United States, and the conditions are rough and there's a lot of violence. But it's not that unusual of a prison. It just became my prison that I wanted to work with, because I'd gone down there and I got to know the psychologist. And so that started my deep desire to bring a Vipassana program to Donaldson. No idea of a film, no idea of a book, just an idea of bringing a program to them that I thought might be helpful. I'd seen that documentary film, Doing Time, Doing Vipassana, and I thought, wow, prison in New Delhi, prison in Birmingham, what's the difference? This could be helpful at Donaldson. And I had complete cooperation with Dr. Kavanaugh, who went on and became the chief psychologist, the director of treatment for the whole Alabama correctional system. And he and I worked with the Vipassana people at Shelburne Falls at the Vipassana Center in Western Massachusetts to make this happen. And it took a few years, and there were many hurdles and obstacles along the way. But in 2002, in January, we brought the first program to Donaldson. And that's where I saw the beauty of, the men meditating on their mats for 10 hours a day, day after day, for a total of 10 days. I didn't get to see much because it's a men's prison, and once a 10-day Vipassana program begins, and this is true in any Vipassana center around the world, not just in a prison, only the prisoners were allowed to, and the staff were allowed in the program most of the time, but there were a few sittings each day in which I could go in there and sit with them. I was actually cooking the vegetarian food outside of the prison with other people and trolleying it in 3 meals a day into the prison. And so this was when I got to sit with the men and to see what was happening.
So let's take a step back about your own Vipassana practice and how that came up. You also have your own practice in a couple of different senses. How did that come about?
Well, I studied meditation, I think first with John Kabat-Zinn. I took it as a patient, and then I did, because I was just learning to manage my own stress. That was probably also about 15 years ago. And I also took it as a provider, as a therapist. And I've studied a fair amount about meditation, but not had much of my own practice. You know how it is with healers. They want to heal other people, and they don't know how to help themselves. That was certainly true of me from my very beginnings. I wanted to help people, but didn't know how to help myself that much. But again, I hadn't heard of Vipassana when I went down to Donaldson in 1999, but I did immediately after that. I saw Doing Time, Doing Vipassana. I heard about Vipassana, and so I contacted the Vipassana Center in Shelburne Falls and said, there's a prison in Alabama where it looks like maybe we can bring the program down, and they jumped on it immediately because that was always the greatest wish, was to bring the program into a prison. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is I hadn't myself done Vipassana. I'd never done a 10-day sitting. And as you might know, you have to start out with a 10-day sitting. You can't go and do a weekend Vipassana sitting. You have to start with the full 10-day.
They start you at the deep end, yeah.
Yeah, and that's not even the deepest end you can jump off of. And you can go to a 30-day or 60-day for sure. But anyway, I did my first 10-day Vipassana sitting with the staff members that we flew from Donaldson to Shelburne Falls to do a sitting, and I sat with them. Amazing thing, because what the Vipassana organization requires is that if a prison wants to bring a program behind the walls, they've got to also walk the walk, and they have to actually take the sitting themselves. Some of them, and we had a group of, I think it was six members of the staff, treatment and security and administrative, Dr. Kavanaugh himself, and we all sat together.
Tell us about that experience, what that was like, what sort of positive things occurred in that, and what were there any surprises, things you weren't expecting during that?
I found it extremely wrenchingly difficult and arduous, and hour after hour after hour of it's the common complaint, which is the mind wanders. In my psychotherapy practice, people will say to me all the time, I can't meditate because my mind is too active. And so I say,
I can't exercise because I'm out of shape.
Right, that's exactly the same thing. It was really difficult. And I was also, that's again the healer or caretaker in me. I was also eyeballing the other people to see how they were doing, because I wanted to make sure that this was a success for everybody. And everybody had their own incredible difficulties and battles, as one does in a Vipassana sitting. Even if you've been a serious meditator for many years, I think going to a Vipassana sitting is it's more difficult just because of the sheer number of hours, and you're not allowed to do anything but meditate. You can walk in a circle outside. I mean, like a track. You're allowed to walk around the track. I took a yoga mat and running shoes when I did my first Vipassana, and immediately realized that you're not allowed to do any of those things for a very good reason, because they want you to be focused within yourself, and they don't want you discharging energy through exercise or calling somebody on the phone and thinking about what's going on outside yourself or outside in the world. They want you focused on your own inner self. Very powerful.
It is, and I was going to mention to people who have considered doing a longer retreat, if you haven't done anything beyond a weekend, doing a 9-10 day kind of retreat that's in a silent setting, right, where really it is focused meditation for anywhere from 6 to 10 hours a day. And granted, it's not sitting the entire time. You can get up and walk, but really the focus is your practice. It can be extremely beneficial. Very hard, yes, absolutely. But the long-term benefits and help can be very, very transformative.
And so the particular lineage of Vipassana that you see in the film that is in Shelburne Falls is the lineage of Mr. Goenka, and you have to do it 10 days. You can't do a 6-day, or it's got to be that prescribed length. And I think it was the very rigidity and strictness of that particular program that allowed it to be accepted inside the walls of a prison, and to do so well inside a prison, because a prison is a very rigid is not a very polite word to use, but it's very, very strict and shut down, and rules that must be obeyed. And I think Vipassana is very similar. I mean, it's all written down exactly every minute of the day what you're going to be doing. And these two cultures, a prison and an ancient meditation practice, fit together so neatly. It just works. It's still down there. It's going on. In a few days, there's another 10-day program. In fact, I think it might be today, another 10-day program starting at Donaldson. And it as long as they'll tolerate it there, and nothing's forever, it really works. And the prisoners take to it, and it's amazing how they take to it.
Again, for people who are a little hesitant about it, because it sounds like we're equating a 10-day retreat with a prison sentence. It's not quite it. Please understand that what this is doing, and why it is so very structured, is that it does free you up from having to have those worldly concerns, so that you are able to practice with an open mind and focus on what it is you're doing with the meditation.
Right. I do have to say, and this surprises people, that prisons are a very good setting for a deep contemplative practice. They're almost monastic. They're very cruel and they're very dangerous, but you've got the fixings of a monastery in a prison. And if with a culture change like is taking place at Donaldson, I'm not saying it's perfect, but with the kind of culture change that goes from the kind of stand-up man, they talk about the stand-up man. I've written about it myself, which is the kind of armor the kind of gladiator armor that you have to wear inside prison, where you're never inside yourself and you're always looking around and anticipating danger. But I think it's the strictness of the routine, the fact that people are totally cut off from the outside world, and the high level of suffering that drives them so deep inside themselves. Because the Vipassana teachers that sat that very first course at Donaldson sat with the prisoners and observed them and assisted them and nurtured them and helped them through their difficult journey, said that they had never in all their years of teaching in the free world seen students who worked as hard as the prisoners did.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So this is all very deep and moving work that you're doing in this first engagement with the prisoners. And let's talk about how the concept of a film and actually doing that came about, and what was the process of getting that moving?
I think a light bulb went off in my head, and I thought, yeah, this has got to be. I love documentary film anyway, because it doesn't preach to you. It just lays out what's happening. Of course, it's edited, so you are making all kinds of decisions along the way about what you're going to show and what you're not. But a light bulb went off, and I thought, yeah, doing Vipassana, that really changed me when I saw it. That got me very excited, and I wanted to do something like that. And I think documentary film can do that. It can make people say, I want to get involved in this issue, or yes, that's like me, or I'm not that different from that person that I see in the film. And so that's when I made that decision. And I searched around for a while. I had a couple different film crews. I knew nothing about what I was doing, but luckily other people did. I just, I found the story. I've got a good eye for a story, and as I said, I know how to write, but making a film is extremely, is very different from writing. Because I know whenever I had tried to have too heavy a hand in the editing suite and said, put this in there, take that out, or something like that, I was almost always wrong. And I found a young editor named Andy Kokora, who's the editor of the film and also a co-director and writer. We were writers together on the film. He cut the story. He figured it out. He understood what the story was, and he just worked so intimately with the footage that I already had a lot of footage when I went to. Andy works for Northern Light Productions in Boston, and I went in there with a whole lot of footage in my hands, not knowing what to do with it, that I'd shot with other people. And he began studying it, and I worked with producers, Anne Marie Stein and Bester Cram at Northern Light Productions. And, they know the film business, and I don't, but I know a story. So I think that the teamwork was really good. And we worked on this film for a while, and then things were happening down in Alabama that meant we kind of got shut down, which when anybody who hasn't seen the film, when it will really grab you when you see it, what happened. Because at first I was very sad that this happened, but because it was very unfortunate for the prisoners. But I was also very sad that the film wasn't going to be finished, because it would be a film with no ending or no real story, and then it actually becomes the climax in the story. We went back, and that's the real climax of going back in later and seeing how these men have maintained themselves after being really shut down in a way that they weren't even allowed to meditate for years. And they maintained themselves. And some of those letters that they wrote are in the book, Letters from the Dhamma Brothers. They already had the practice in themselves, and they didn't have the right conditions, but they still had it, and they could go back to it and bring it out, and they would gather together in secret groups and still meditate, and you can feel that in the film.
So that's one of the inspirational things that it sounds like has come out of that experience, even in the face of this unexpected shutdown. What were some of the other things that, in the process of it or the after effects since the film was released a number of years ago, what are some of the inspiring stories that have come out of that since that time?
Well, there are stories that have come out with the release and distribution of the film, which are amazing, and also the stories of the men surviving since the film was finished and trying to get to see the film and trying to get to see the book, and these are kind of forbidden materials down there now. I'm really amazed that the film has had a national broadcast on public television. It had a theatrical rollout in 2008. It got incredible reviews. Oprah Winfrey brought me to Chicago, and she interviewed several of the Dhamma brothers with a phone hookup. And Oprah own TV. Oprah Winfrey Network TV now owns the film, the commercial rights to the TV rights to the film. That's been shown on her network. The film is offered on Netflix, Hulu, iTunes, DocuSeek. It's translated into 28 languages. It's all over the place, and I try to understand why that is, because I thought it was going to be a low-budget training film for somebody.
And it's a documentary. Those typically don't get that kind of
penetration. No, and I think it has to do with what I believe is the power of story, the power of somebody's authentic tale, which you sort of feel the power of it, and I think it can change the world. And I think that can be true for a photograph. I think it was a few photographs that ended the war in Vietnam, for instance. The power of visual imagery to make people open their hearts and open their minds and see things differently. And also the power of the Dhamma brothers themselves' deep wish, which is true of all prisoners, but particularly in a long-stay facility like Donaldson, to tell their stories. Well, here's just a funny little story of something that happened a couple of weeks ago that will show you about the power of prisoners' need to connect in the outside world through their stories, if they should be given the opportunity, which they usually aren't. I had a package I had to pick up at the post office, and I went there and I got this square, sort of heavy box, and I opened it up, and it was a manuscript written in tiny handwriting in pencil, and there was a little letter there, and a prisoner named James, who's in the film, when I'd been at Donaldson a couple of years ago, and he said to me, I'm writing my life story, and I'm going to send it to Oprah. I think he figured Oprah had an interest in the Dhamma brothers, and that she might be interested in his book and publish it, and so forth and so on. So anyway, the letter says, I sent it to Oprah, and I never heard anything back from her, and my manuscript was never returned. So I just wrote it again.
By hand in pencil.
Yeah, hundreds and hundreds of pages. And I just, to me, that just betrays that need to tell their stories and also not to be forgotten and to be understood and to be appreciated. And I think the Dhamma brothers are so pleased that people around the world are looking at their faces and hearing their stories. And actually, as you probably know, from Vipassana or meditation in general, I guess your story is not the facts.
Right.
It's your relationship to the facts.
Right.
And their relationships to their stories, they go into prison and they hate themselves, and they despise themselves, and they have very low self-esteem, and they're guilty in a very unhealthy way. There's a healthy guilt and there's an unhealthy guilt, and I think healthy guilt is understanding how things came to be and taking responsibility for them, but not spending the rest of your days beating yourself up. And so I think they, when they do these practices, they really begin to accept themselves in so many ways. And I think the letters are another place that you can really see that, or just listening to some of the video clips on my website where the guys are sitting around talking after the program that they just took about, how they see things now.
It's an interesting paradox, and I was just talking with Mark Lesser from the Search Inside Yourself Institute about paradoxes with his new book. It's a running theme throughout, and you bring this up very well, that these are their authentic stories, and those can inspire and guide us and help us in our lives. And we also then have to have that bit of separation, a bit of elbow room from those stories, that those aren't the thing itself, that those are ways to help shape it, but they're not the thing itself.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, I also wanted to ask about the process itself of filming under the circumstances that you were. Might have been a bit challenging. Were there particular difficulties that you ran into in just the filming process? Yeah,
we weren't really allowed to wander around too much. we don't have a lot of what's called B-roll, which I really wish we did, which is just, scene settings around the prison, somebody doing this, somebody doing that, different types of activities. It's such a shut-down place. And one time we went in, where you see us going in at the end for one of our last filmings, and we were just told as we were going through the metal detectors and things that there had just been a murder and 6 stabbings. It was around Christmas time, after Christmas, and people get really desperate, to they're upset about being caged in, and so we had to be hurried into a protected room where there was about to be a 3-day refresher sitting for some of the Dhamma brothers. That was the occasion we were going in for. So we went into the closed-off room where the sitting was going to be, and we never strayed outside of that. So that was a challenge, just getting a camera into a prison. And the more years go by, the harder it gets. I used to take my tape recorder into prisons in Massachusetts all the time, and they would look at them, and they sometimes even take them apart, but you could take them in, but no more. You can't take any kind of electronics in anymore. So access is really challenging.
Now, something else I wanted to ask you about is you mentioned on the website, and I'll be mentioning this at the conclusion, dhammabrothers.com, is the Freedom Behind Bars Foundation and its partnership with Journeys in Films for the Educator Pilot Project. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, it's very exciting what's happening right now. Journeys in Film is an organization, it's about 10 years old, in which they take really good fiction films. This is the first time they've ever had a documentary when they chose the Dhamma brothers, but they'll take a wonderful fiction film like Children of Heaven or The Cop or Whale Rider, and there's one about South Africa, and I wish I could remember the name of it. Well, then there's one about Korea. I'll just tell you the story of this film, and you'll see the kind of films that they choose because they're really wonderful. It's called The Way Home. I think that's the name of it. And a single parent, a mother, has to take her small son into the mountains in Korea to stay with his grandmother for a while she looks for a job. And he's probably about 8 years old. And he packs his bag with all of his electronics and goes into this mountain. I wouldn't even call it a village. It's just a couple houses way up in the mountains, and this very frail, very old woman whom he really doesn't know at all. And he's left there with her, and he's happy because he's got his toys and he can just ignore his grandmother. And then his toys, the batteries begin to run out, and there's no electricity, and the batteries run out, and pretty soon he's just sitting there with nothing to do, totally bored with this old lady, and he hates her, and he's angry at her, and he yells at her. And then the days go by, and he begins to wake up. And it's just such a beautiful film. So if you go onto the Journeys in Film website, you can download the curriculum for The Way Home, and there's easy access to the film. So a teacher in a classroom anywhere in the world that wants to teach a unit on this particular film and the curriculum can download the curriculum and easily get the film. And the curriculum is amazing because it's really multidisciplinary and comprehensive, and it has, you learn about Korean history, Korean culture, and geography, and the children get a real chance to study the story and talk about the characters in the story in great detail and write in their journals about it. Well, so Journeys in Film has chosen the Dhamma brothers, and we have been working on a curriculum for quite a while, and the curriculum is not complete, but it's complete enough that, and I didn't write the curriculum. I'm certainly working on, editing it and parts of it, but it's written by teachers, expert writers, teachers who in those particular fields that they're writing about, and expert consultants that Journeys brings in to work on that particular. The Dhamma Brothers curriculum will be with 8 lessons. It will have anywhere from, a teacher could spend a couple weeks working on the film, and then there's the letters, because the letters will be available, links to the letters. So they read the letters from the Dhamma brothers, and they study a particular Dhamma brother character and his crimes and his story and his journey. And there's a section on meditation in the brain and some of the neurobiology, neuroscience, Buddhism, of course, and Vipassana specifically, and criminal justice. So obviously this is for an older population. Again, it's a documentary, which is different for Journeys. It's also an older population. It's being offered, we're piloting it right now in 50 high schools, colleges, and universities, and some locked up settings like jails and prisons this winter, spring. And then this is being, the evaluation, the offering and the evaluation is being done by Big Picture Instructional Design, and they help teachers with using films in classrooms by developing questionnaires and things like that. This is a little bit different for them because they're really overseeing the evaluation process. And at the end of the semester, the teachers will fill out an evaluation and talk about which lessons were helpful and how they were helpful and which lessons weren't as useful to them and why. And we'll take all the feedback we get from those settings and we'll finalize the curriculum. And it will be launched online for free probably next summer. And that will allow, again, the very small stories of a few prisoners in a maximum security prison in Alabama, that will allow classrooms around the world to study this.
Wonderful. And can people help with that? I think I saw something about contributing to a goal to support that program.
Yes, they can. If you go on to my website and the contact page, you can donate in general to Freedom Behind Bars Foundation, where everything, of course, is plowed right into the support and distribution and outreach of the film or things like this. Or they can just simply donate to the Educator Pilot Project.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So the website that we've been talking about, and you can find out more information about the film and the book and the program we were just discussing on the website www.dhammabrothers.com, and that's DHAMMA brothers.com. And our guest today has been Jenny Phillips. Jenny, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time.
It was wonderful. Thank you, Ted.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the SBA website at secularbuddhism.org, and you'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. Discussion about this episode can be found on the episode page itself, along with show notes. The music for The Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizen Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi and Rodrigo Rodriguez. Their websites are also linked on the SBA site on the About Podcast Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on The Secular Buddhist.